Hiber-Nation 61. Grizzly's Growls presents Stories from the Hiber-Nation. Read by David Grizzly Smith. Wild Animals I Have Known by Ernest Thompson Seton, as read by David Grizzly Smith. REDRUFF The Story of the Don Valley Partridge, Part 5. Food grew scarce as winter wore on. REDRUFF clung to the old ravine and the piney sides of Taylor's Hill, but every month brought its food and its foes. The mad moon brought madness, solitude, and grapes. The snow moon came with rose hips, and the stormy moon brought brows of birch and silver storms that sheathed the woods in ice and made it hard to keep one's perch while pulling off the frozen buds. REDRUFF's beak grew terribly worn with the work, so that even when closed there was still an opening through behind the hook. But nature had prepared him for the slippery footing. His toes, so slim and trim in September, had sprouted rows of sharp, horny points, and these grew with the growing cold till the first snow had found him fully equipped with snowshoes and ice creepers. The cold weather had driven away most of the hawks and owls and made it impossible for his four-footed enemies to approach unseen, so that things were nearly balanced. His flight in search of food had daily led him farther on, till he discovered and explored the Rosedale Creek with its banks of silver birch, and Castle Frank with its grapes and rowan berries, as well as the Chester Woods, where Emilianture and Virginia creeper swung their fruit bunches, and checkerberries glowed beneath the snow. He soon found out that for some strange reason men with guns did not go within the high fence of Castle Frank. So among these scenes he lived his life, learning new places, new foods, and grew wiser and more beautiful every day. He was quite alone so far as kindred were concerned, but that scarcely seemed a hardship. Wherever he went he would see the jolly chickadees scrambling merrily about, and he remembered the time when they'd seemed such big, important creatures. They were the most absurdly cheerful things in the woods. Before the autumn was fairly over, they'd begun to sing their famous refrain, "Spring soon," and kept it up with good heart, more or less all through the winter's direst storms, till at length the waning of the hunger moon, our February, seemed really to lend some point to the ditty, and they redoubled their optimistic announcement to the world in an I-told-you-so mood. Soon good support was found, for the sun gained strength and melted the snow from the southern slope of Castle Frank Hill, and exposed great banks of fragrant wintergreen, whose berries were a bounteous feast for REDRUFF, and ending the hard work of pulling frozen browse, gave his bill the needed chance to grow into its proper shape again. Very soon the first bluebird came flying over and warbled as he flew, "Spring is coming." The sun kept gaining, and early one day in the dark of the wakening moon of March there was a loud caw, caw, and old Silverspot, the king crow, came swinging along from the south at the head of his troops and officially announced, "The spring has come." All nature seemed to respond to this, the opening of the birds' new year, and yet it was something within that chiefly seemed to move them. The chickadees went simply wild. They sang their spring now, spring now, spring now, so persistently that one wondered how they found time to get a living. And REDRUFF felt it thrill him through and through. He sprang with joyous vigor on a stump and sent rolling down the little valley again and again a thundering thump, 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 thunder that wakened dull echoes as it rolled and voiced his gladness in the coming of the spring. Away down the valley was Cuddy's shanty, and he heard the drum call on the still morning air, and "Reckon there was a cock partridge to git," and came sneaking up the ravine with his gun. But Redruff skimmed away in silence, nor rested till once more in Mud Creek Glen. And there he mounted the very log where first he had drummed, and rolled his loud tattoo again and again, till a small boy, who had taken a short cut to the mill through the woods, ran home badly scared to tell his mother he was sure the Indians were on the warpath, for he'd heard their war drums beating in the glen. Why does a happy boy holla? Why does a lonesome youth sigh? They don't know any more that Redruff knew why every day now he mounted some dead log and thumped and thundered in the woods, then strutted and admired his gorgeous blazing roughs as they flashed their jewels in the sunlight, and then thundered out again. Whence now came the strange wish for someone else to admire the plumes, and why had such a notion never come until the pussy-willow moon? Thump, 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 thunder! Thump, thump, thunder! He rumbled again and again. Day after day he sought the favored log, and a new beauty, a rose-red comb, grew out above each clear, keen eye, and the clumsy snowshoes were wholly shed from his feet. His ruff grew finer, his eye brighter, and his whole appearance splendid to behold, as he strutted and flashed in the sun. But oh, he was so lonesome now. Yet what could he do but blindly vent his hankering in this daily drum parade, till on a day early in the loveliest May, when the trilliums had fringed his log with silver stars, and he had drummed and logged and drummed again, his keen ear caught a sound, a gentle football in the brush. He turned to his statue and watched. He knew he had been watched. Could it be possible? Yes. There it was, a form, another, a shy little lady grouse, now bashfully seeking to hide. In a moment he was by her side, his whole nature swamped by a new feeling, burnt up with thirst, a cooling spring in sight. And how he spread and flashed his proud array! How came he to know that that would please? He puffed his plumes and contrived to stand just right to catch the sun, and strutted and uttered a low, soft chuckle that must have been just as good as the sweet nothings of another race, for clearly now her heart was won. Won, really, days ago, if only he'd known. For full 3 days she had come at that loud tattoo, and coyly admired him from afar, and felt a little piqued that he had not yet found her so close at hand. So it was not quite all mischance, perhaps, that little stamp that caught his ear. But now she meekly bowed her head with sweet, submissive grace. The desert passed, the parched, burnt wanderer found the spring at last. Oh, those were bright, glad days in the lovely glen of the unlovely name. The sun was never so bright, and the piny air was balmier than dreams, and that great noble bird came daily on his log, sometimes with her, sometimes quite alone, and drummed for very joy of being alive. But why sometimes alone? Why not forever with his brownie bride? Why should she stay to feast and play with him for hours, and then take some stealthy chance to slip away and see him no more for hours, or till next day, when his martial music from the log announced him restless for her quick return? There was a woodland mystery here he could not clear. Why should her stay with him grow daily less until it was down to minutes, and one day at last she never came at all, nor the next, and Redruff, wild, careered on lightning wing and drummed on the old log, then away upstream on another log, and skimmed the hill to another ravine to drum and drum. But on the 4th day, when he came and loudly called her, as of old, at their earliest tryst, he heard a sound in the bushes, as at first, and there was his missing brownie bride. with 10 little peeping partridges following after. Redruff skimmed to her side, terribly frightening the bright-eyed downlings, and was just a little dashed to find the brood with claims far stronger than his own. But he soon accepted the change, and thenceforth joined himself to the brood, caring for them as his father never had for him. Part 6. Good fathers are rare in the grouse world. The mother grouse builds her nest and hatches out her young without help. She even hides the place of the nest from the father and meets him only at the drum log and at the feeding ground, or perhaps the dusting place, which is the clubhouse of the grouse kind. When Brownie's little ones came out, they had filled her every thought, even to the forgetting of their splendid father. But on the third day, when they were strong enough, she had taken them with her at their father's call. Some fathers take no interest in their little ones, but Redruff joined at once to help Brownie in the task of rearing the brood. They had learned to eat and drink just as their father had learned long ago, and could toddle along with their mother leading the way, while the father ranged nearby or followed far behind. The very next day, as they went from the hillside down toward the creek in a somewhat drawn-out string, like beads with a big one at each end, a red squirrel, peeping around a pine trunk, watched the procession of downlings, with the runty struggling far in the rear. Redruff, yards behind, preening his feathers on a high log, had escaped the eye of the squirrel, whose strange, perverted thirst for birdling blood was roused at what seemed so fair a chance. With murderous intent to cut off the hindmost straggler, he made a dash. Brownie could not have seen him till too late, but Redruff did. He flew for that red-haired cutthroat. His weapons were his fists, that is, the knob joints of the wings, and what a blow he could strike. At the first onset he struck the squirrel square on the end of the nose, his weakest spot, and sent him reeling. He staggered and wriggled into a brush pile where he had expected to carry the little grouse, and there lay gasping with red drops trickling down his wicked snout. The partridges left him lying there, and what became of him they never knew, but he troubled them no more. The family went on toward the water, but a cow had left deep tracks in the sandy loam, and into one of these fell one of the chicks and peeped in dire distress when he found he could not get out. Well, this was a fix. Neither old one seemed to know what to do, but as they tramped vainly around the edge, the sandy bank caved in, and running down formed a long slope, up which the young one ran and rejoined his brothers under the broad veranda of their mother's tail. Brownie was a bright little mother, of small stature, keen of wit and sense, and was night and day alert to care for her darling chicks. How proudly she stepped and clucked through the arching woods with her dainty brood behind her. How she strained her little brown tail almost to a half circle to give them a broader shade, and never flinched at the sight of any foe, but held ready to fight or fly, whichever seemed the best for her little ones. Now before the chicks could fly, they had a meeting with old Cuddy. Though it was June, he went out with his gun. Up the third ravine he went, and Tyke, his dog, ranging ahead, came so dangerously near the Brownie brood that Redruff ran to meet him, and by the old but never-failing trick led him on a foolish chase away back down the valley of the Don. But Cuddy, as it chanced, came right along, straight for the brood, and Brownie, giving the signal to her children, "Cur, cur, hide, hide," ran to lead the man away just as her mate had led the dog. Full of a mother's devoted love and skilled in the learning of the woods, she ran in silence till quite near, then sprang up with a roar of wings right in his face, and tumbling on the leaves she shammed a lameness that for a moment deceived the poacher. But when she dragged one wing and whined about his feet and then slowly crawled away, he knew just what it meant, that it was all a trick to lead him from her brood, and he struck at her a savage blow. But little Brownie was quick. She avoided the blow and limped behind a sapling, there to beat herself upon the leaves again in sore distress, and seemed so lame that Cuddy made another try to strike her down with a stick. She moved in time to balk him, and bravely, steadfast still, to lead him from her helpless little ones, she flung herself before him and beat her gentle breast upon the ground, and moaned as though begging for mercy. And Cuddy, failing again to strike her, raised his gun and fired charge enough to kill a bear. He blew poor, brave, devoted Brownie into quivering, bloody rags. This gunner brute knew the young must be hiding near, so looked about to find them. But no one moved or peeped. He saw not one, but as he trampled about with heedless, hateful feet, he crossed again and again their hiding ground, and more than one of the silent little sufferers he trampled to death, and neither knew nor cared. Redruff had taken the yellow brute way off downstream, and now he returned to where he'd left his mate. The murderer had gone, taking her remains to be thrown to the dog. Redruff sought about and found the bloody spot with feathers, Brownie's feathers, scattered around, and now he knew the meaning of that shot. Who can tell what his horror and his mourning were? The outward signs were few. Some minutes dumbly gazing at the place with a downcast, bedraggled look, and then a change at the thought of their helpless brood. Back to the hiding-place he went and called the well-known "Creets, creets." Did every grave give up its little inmate at the magic word? No, barely more than half. 6 little balls of down unveiled their lustrous eyes, and rising ran to meet him, but 4 feathered little bodies had found their graves indeed. Redruff called again and again, till he was sure that all who could respond had come, then led them from that dreadful place far, far away upstream, where barbed wire fences and bramble thickets were found to offer a less grateful but more reliable shelter. Here the brood grew and were trained by their father just as his mother had trained him, though wider knowledge and experience gave him many advantages. He knew so well the country round and all the feeding grounds and how to meet the ills that harass partridge life, that the summer passed and not a chick was lost. They grew and flourished, and when the gunner moon arrived, they were a fine family of 6 grown-up grouse, with Redruff, splendid in his gleaming copper feathers, at their head. He had ceased to drum during the summer after the loss of Brownie, but drumming is to the partridge what singing is to the lark. While it is his love song, it is also an expression of exuberance, born of health. And when the moult was over, and September food and weather had renewed his splendid plumes and braced him up again, his spirits revived, and finding himself one day near the old log, he mounted impulsively and drummed again and again. From that time he often drummed, while his children sat around, or one who showed his father's blood would mount some nearby stump or stone and beat the air in a loud tattoo. The black grapes and the mad moon now came on, but Redruff's brood were of a vigorous stock. Their robust health meant robust wits, and though they got the craze, had passed within a week, and only 3 had flown away for good. Redruff, with his remaining 3, was living in the glen when the snow came. It was light, flaky snow, and as the weather was not very cold, the family squatted for the night under the low, flat boughs of a cedar tree. But next day the storm continued. It grew colder, and the drifts piled up all day. At night the snowfall ceased, but the frost grew hotter still. So Redruff, leading the family to a birch tree above a deep drift, dived into the snow, and the others did the same. Then into the holes the wind blew the loose snow, their pure white bedclothes, and thus tucked in they slept in comfort. For the snow is a warm wrap, and the air passes through it easily enough for breathing. Next morning each partridge found a solid wall of ice before him from his frozen breath, but easily turned to one side and rose on the wing at Redruff's morning "Careet, careet, careets! Come, children, fly!" Well, this was the first night for them in a snowdrift, though it was an old story to Redruff. Next night they merrily dived again into bed. The north wind tucked them in as before, but a change in the weather was brewing. The night wind veered to the east. A fall of heavy flakes gave place to sleet, and that to silver rain. The whole wide world was sheathed in ice, and when the grouse awoke to quit their beds, they found themselves sealed in with a great cruel sheet of edgeless ice. The deeper snow was still quite soft, and Redruff bored his way to the top, but there the hard white sheet defied his strength. Hammer and struggle as he might, he could make no impression, and only bruised his wings and head. His life had been made up of keen joys and dull hardships, with frequent, sudden, desperate straits, but this seemed the hardest brunt of all, as the slow hours wore on and found him weakening with his struggles, but no nearer to freedom. He could hear the struggling of his family, too, or sometimes heard them calling to him for help with their long-drawn, plaintive "Petey, Petey." They were hidden from many of their enemies, but not from the pangs of hunger, and when the night came down, the weary prisoners, worn out with hunger and useless toil, grew quiet in despair. At first they'd been afraid the fox would come and find them imprisoned there at his mercy, but as the second night went slowly they no longer cared, and even wished he would come and break the encrusted snow, and so give them at least a fighting chance for life. But when the fox really did come, padding over the frozen drift, the deep-laid love of life revived, and they crouched in utter stillness till he passed. The second day was one of driving storm. The north wind sent his snow horses hissing and careening over the white earth, tossing and curling their white manes and kicking up more snow as they dashed on. The long, hard grinding of the granular snow seemed to be thinning the snow crust, for though far from dark below, it kept on growing lighter. Redruff had pecked and pecked at the underside all day, till his head ached and his bill was wearing blunt, but when the sun went down he seemed as far as ever from escape. The night passed like the others, except no fox went trotting overhead. In the morning he renewed his pecking, though now with scarcely any force, and the voices or struggles of the others were no more heard. As the daylight grew stronger, he could see that his long efforts had made a brighter spot above him in the snow, and he continued feebly pecking. Outside, the storm horses kept on trampling all day. The crust was really growing thin under their heels, and late that afternoon his bill went through into the open air. New life came with this gain, and he pecked away, till just before the sun went down he had made a hole that his head, his neck, and his ever-beautiful ruffs could pass. His great broad shoulders were too large, but he could now strike downward, which gave him fourfold force. The snow crust crumbled quickly, and in a little while he sprang from his icy prison once more free. But the young ones? Redruff flew to the nearest bank, hastily gathered a few red hips to stay his gnawing hunger, and then returned to the prison drift and clucked and stamped. He got only one reply, a feeble "Petey, Petey," and scratching with his sharp claws on the thinned granular sheet he soon broke through, and Greytail feebly crawled out of the hole. But that was all. The others, scattered he could not tell where in the drift, made no reply, gave no sign of life, and he was forced to leave them. When the snow melted in the spring, their bodies came to view, skin, bones, and feathers, nothing more. Part 7. It was long before Redruff and Graytail fully recovered, but food and rest in plenty are sure cure-alls, and a bright, clear day in midwinter had the usual effect of setting the vigorous Redruff to drumming on the log. Was it the drumming or the telltale tracks of their snowshoes on the omnipresent snow that betrayed them to Cuddy? He came prowling again and again up the ravine with dog and gun, intent to hunt the partridges down. They knew him of old, and he was coming now to know them well. That great copper-ruffed cock was becoming famous up and down the valley. During the gunner moon, many one had tried to end his splendid life, just as a worthless wretch of old sought fame by burning the Ephesian wonder of the world. But Redruff was deep in woodcraft. He knew just where to hide, and when to rise on silent wing, and when to squat till overstepped, then rise on thunder wing within a yard to shield himself at once behind some mighty tree trunk and speed away. But Cuddy never ceased to follow with his gun that red-ruffed cock. Many a long snapshot he tried, but somehow always found a tree, a bank, or some safe shield between, and Redruff lived and throve and drummed. When the snow moon came, he moved with Graytail to the Castle Frank woods, where food was plenty as well as grand old trees. There was in particular on the east slope among the creeping hemlocks a splendid pine. It was 6 feet through, and its first branches began at the tops of the other trees. Its top in summer-time was a famous resort for the blue jay and his bride. Here, far beyond the reach of shot, in the warm spring days the jay would sing and dance before his mate, spread his bright blue plumes, and warble the sweetest fairyland music, so sweet and soft that few hear it but the one for whom it is meant, and books know nothing at all about it. This great pine had an especial interest for Redruff, now living near with his remaining young one, but its base, not its far-away crown, concerned him. All around were low, creeping hemlocks, and among them the partridge vine and the wintergreen grew, and the sweet black acorns could be scratched from under the snow. There was no better feeding ground, for when that insatiable gunner came on them there, it was easy to run low among the hemlock to the great pine, then rise with a derisive whir behind its bulk, keeping the huge trunk in line with the deadly gun, skim off in safety. A dozen times at least this pine had saved them during the lawful murder season, and here it was that Cuddy, knowing their feeding habits, laid a new trap. Under the bank he sneaked and watched in ambush while an accomplice went around the sugar loaf to drive the birds. He came trampling through the low thicket where Redruff and Graytail were feeding, and long before the gunner was dangerously near, Redruff gave a low, warning roar, danger, and walked quickly toward the great pine in case they had to rise. Graytail was some distance up the hill, and suddenly caught sight of a new foe close at hand, the yellow cur coming right on. Redruff, much farther off, could not see him for the bushes, and Graytail became greatly alarmed. "Quit, quit!" she cried. "Fly, fly!" running down the hill for a start. "Quit, cur! This way, hide!" cried the cooler Redruff, for he saw that now the man with the gun was getting in range. He gained the great trunk, and behind it, as he paused a moment to call earnestly to Graytail, "This way, this way!" heard a slight noise under the bank before him that betrayed the ambush. Then there was a terrified cry from Graytail as the dog sprang at her. She rose in the air and skimmed behind the shielding trunk, away from the gunner in the open, right into the power of the miserable wretch under the bank. Whirr, and up she went, a beautiful, sentient, noble being. Bang! And down she fell, battered and bleeding, to gasp her life out and to lie mere carrion in the snow. It was a perilous place for Redruff. There was no chance for a safe rise, so he squatted low. The dog came within 10 feet of him, and the stranger, coming across the cuddy, passed at 5 feet, but he never moved till a chance came to slip behind the great trunk away from them both. Then he safely rose and flew to the lonely glen of Taylor's Hill. One by one the deadly, cruel gun had stricken his near ones down, till now, once more, he was alone. The snow moon slowly passed with many a narrow escape, and Redruff, now known to be the only survivor of his kind, was relentlessly pursued, and grew wilder every day. It seemed at length a waste of time to follow him with a gun, so when the snow was deepest and the food scarcest, Cuddy hatched a new plot. Right across the feeding ground, almost the only good one now in the stormy moon, he set a row of snares. A cottontail rabbit, an old friend, cut several of these with his sharp teeth, but some remained, and Redruff, watching a far-off speck that might turn out a hawk, trod right in one of them, and in an instant was jerked into the air to dangle by 1 foot. Have the wild things no moral or legal rights? What right has man to inflict such long and fearful agony on a fellow creature, simply because that creature does not speak his language? All that day, with growing, racking pains, poor Redruff hung and beat his great strong wings in helpless struggles to be free. All day, all night, with growing torture, until he only longed for death. But no one came. The morning broke, the day wore on, and still he hung there, slowly dying, his very strength a curse. The second night crawled slowly down, and when in the dawdling hours of darkness a great horned owl, drawn by the feeble flutter of a dying wing, cut short the pain, the deed was wholly kind. The wind blew down the valley from the north. The snow horses went racing over the wrinkled ice, over the dawn flats, and over the marsh toward the lake, white, for they were driven snow, but on them, scattered dark, were riding plumy fragments of partridge ruffs, the famous rainbow ruffs. And they rode on the winter wind that night, away and away to the south, over the dark and boisterous lake, as they rode in the gloom of his mad moon flights, riding and riding on till they were engulfed, the last trace of the last of the Don Valley race. For now no partridge comes to Castle Frank. Its woodbirds miss the martial spring salutes, and in Mud Creek ravine the old pine drum log, since unused, has rotted in silence away. The fact that these stories are true is the reason why all are tragic. The life of a wild animal always has a tragic end. Such a collection of histories naturally suggests a common thought, a moral, it would have been called in the last century. No doubt each different mind will find a moral to its taste, but I hope some will herein find emphasized a moral as old as Scripture. We and the beasts are kin. Man has nothings that the animals have not at least a vestige of. The animals have nothing that man does not in some degree share. Since, then, the animals are creatures with wants and feelings, differing in degree only from our own, they surely have their rights. Thank you for listening to Stories from the Hiber-Nation. Comment on the website at grizzliesgrowls.com. This program is offered under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.